Now, again, the recovery ledger, this database table, should be a simple table that kind of makes the retries observable and controllable. Again, you can have, for example, a payload ID that is a unique item used for retry and the duplication. So each row is going to have a unique payload ID, so we don't have duplications. So we should never have two rows with same payload ID. It has to be unique. We have the status of, which means the current lifecycle state could be pending processing retry schedule, for example. You have attempt count, how many times it has run. Right? For example, you can say, oh, you attempted 3 times, maximum 3 times, right? And usually after you reach the max attempt, usually you have to send for human review because that means something is really off. Next retry column, retry at when the scheduler should retry. For example, hey, he failed, then retry at this date and time. The error class, for example, is retriable, is permanent or unknown, right? And that's what helps you decide if it's worth trying again or not. And then you have last error you received, which is a human readable debugging context. For example, 429 from provider. For example, if you receive 429, you know it's a rate limiting, you know what happened. And then you have a lock field, prevents duplicate workers. For example, if you have different schedulers so they don't conflict with each other. So when you start a retry, you lock that retry so no other scheduler can retry that same workflow execution again. So you prevent conflict. Now, in terms of retry policy, you have attempts, backup, and jitter. The goal is controlled recovery, not retry storm. You don't want to get a retry like every seconds. And again, that's just going to burn your credits, your workflow execution credits, and it's going to eventually probably you might be backlisted. Imagine if you are trying to connect to Cloud API, for example, or HubSpot CRM, and then you keep bombarding them with a bunch of requests. Eventually, they're going to block it. Okay, it's like a bot. We're going to block this request, and it's going to be a problem, right? So you have to be very smart when it comes to retrying. All right. So one thing that you have to do, you have to define when the system must stop retrying and escalate. So you got to set up a maximum number of attempts. Okay, I'm going to try 3 times. If I try 3 times and it doesn't work, okay, then I'm going to bring in a human. Okay, I'm going to escalate that to a human. I'm going to log that and send a notification to a human to jump in and check what's going on. You have exponential backoff, which essentially it's a technique that increases the delay between attempts. For example, the first attempt, you're going to do in 1 minute. Okay, wait 1 minute and try. If it doesn't work, you know what? Wait for 5 minutes. And then you try. If it doesn't work, okay, the third attempt is going to be after 15 minutes. Meaning you're increasing the time, the delay after each failure. And that's one of the most important technique in this retry mechanism. We use that in software engineering, and this applies also to automations, AI automations. And then we have jitter. Jitter means it's going to add a small randomness, so records do not retry at the exact same second. For example, if you have 2 workflows that kind of fail along at the same time, instead of let them execute exactly the same time, you can add some randomness, like, okay, add a few seconds, milliseconds difference between them, so they don't go all at the same time. Because if you have 1 or 2 workflows, it's fine. But if you have thousands of workflows, then you can again be hit with the rate limiting again because you're sending everything at the same time. So it's good practice to kind of add a jitter to give some randomness, so not all requests they go all at the same time. Now, I think I moved to, okay, so here's an example of a retry schedule. Attempt 1 immediately, attempt 2 add 1 minute, attempt 3, 5 minutes, attempt 4, 15 minutes. If it doesn't work, escalate. And like I said, without backoff, retries can increase pressure on a provider that is already failing or rate limiting you, meaning they're already blocking you, they're already kind of rate limiting you. And if you keep trying without backoff, without this incremental delay, exponential backoff, they're going to keep blocking you because they're going to start thinking you're a bot or something. So you got to give that time for them to remove the rate limiting. and reset your quota, and so you can try again. Now let's talk about some production safeguards around retries. And it's worth mentioning that retries are only safe when the surrounding architecture is safe. Meaning you gotta have idempotency, which means use a unique business key so retries do not create duplicates. So each retry needs to have a unique key. And you will never have two records in that database, so it's not retried multiple times. So you have one record in that database, and you keep track of the status of that retry, but you will not add another row in the database for that same failed workflow. Another thing that's important to have is a locking to prevent two workers from processing the same retry record again. You don't want, for example, if you have two schedulers, you don't want them to retry the same failed workflow again. Because if you have 1,000 failed workflows, then if they try again, then you're going to have 2,000 requests, which, something that you want. You want, like, if, for example, the one scheduler starts processing a failed workflow, it starts the retry process, you don't want any other scheduler to come and do the same. You want to lock it and do not allow any other worker to come and retry the same workflow. Another important thing, you gotta have alerts to notify the team when retries spike or max attempts are reached. For example, if you set up, okay, try up to 5 times. After the 5 times, if it still doesn't work, then you need to bring the human. You gotta send a notification. You can send a Slack notification or Telegram, whatever channel you say, hey, we have this workflow. You try 5 times, it didn't work. Something is off. We need a human to review. The next thing, a safeguard that we should have around retries is dead letter preview, which means after maximum attempts, you spark a resolving records for review, meaning, which was what I just spoke about. Once you reach the maximum attempts, you put that in a queue and you mark it like, okay, this one is almost like it's dead. It's not working. It needs to be reviewed to see what's going on. Something is off, so that you have to mark that record to be reviewed by a human. And you're gonna have a runbook, which is a SOP, like a standard operating procedures that document what the team should do when an item is stuck. Right? For example, you have your team, and you gotta give your team a document. Say, look, this is the procedure, the steps you guys need to take when a workflow fails. When it fails and it retries and it doesn't work. So this is the steps that you need to take. And the steps could be check what was the status of the error, check this table, for example, this database table, for example, to see the information, to see what was the error about, etc., etc. Just instructions to tell them what to do in case workflow fails even after retrying. And then you gotta have the observability, which again is you have to track failures by workflow, provider, error type, and business impact. You gotta gather all the information you can, so it's easier to debug down the road. For example, if the error was while trying to save us a lead in HubSpot, it needs to be recorded somewhere. It needs to say something like, oh, the provider was HubSpot. If the error was while trying to connect to Cloud, it needs to say, yes, the error was related to Cloud, and we got this error from Cloud. So everything needs to be there, so it's easier for you to debug. Now, the build order for a production retry system. So you start with policy, then you add infrastructure, right? So you classify the errors, if it's retried or not. You set the retry policy, max attempts, delay, backoff, jitter. Then you create the ledger. You create a row in the record in the database to track the execution. And then you add a scheduler, which is going to be running in a loop and looking for the records in the database that needs to be retried. And then you add the safeguards, idempotency, alerts, and data review. It's important to see that production retries are not about trying harder. It's about recovering safely, visibly, and without duplicate damage. And with that, we end this presentation. Hopefully, you got enough insights in terms of why you need a retry mechanism for a production level workflow. Make sure you like and subscribe because we're going to release a second video that goes a little bit deeper on the idempotency alerts and that letter review, which are more advanced concepts. We're going to talk about how to implement them. So make sure you stay tuned and so you are notified when we publish the next video. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.